As the day comes to an end on Spring High School, two boys, John and Paul, were exiting the front gate. The boys were heading to John's house to hang out, have fun and play video games to celebrate the final day of school. As the night went on, the boys had more and more fun, happy that summer vacation starts the next day. As the final light gets snuffed out by the dark of the night sky, putting an end to the day, the boys tell each other ghost stories. One of the stories catches Paul's attention cause the story John told was about a dark 6.9, red eyes, white teeth man. Paul stared at John with a terrifying look on his face. John notices the color running out of Paul's face. John reaches over to shake Paul to see if he was all right. John shook Paul 3 times to snap him out of it. Paul raised his head and asked John in a terrifying, fearful voice, "Where did you hear that story from?" Paul and John became friends over this past year, so they don't know that much about each other's past. When John told the story, terrifying and violent memories, John looked surprised, and with a confused look he replied, "One of my old friends told me and found it off the internet." "Why? Look like you seen a ghost." Paul thought to himself the ghost would have been more fun to miss with him, but no. Paul looked at John and told him everything. How the story his old friend told wasn't just a story but real. Paul continues by saying the last person that hears has to tell it to another person by midnight. John looks at Paul with concern and with a little fear in his voice. What happens to the person who heard it last but can't tell the story after midnight? Paul raises his head with a serious, frightening look. Paul said, "Goes missing and appears as a corpse." The room was dead silent, not a word was said. You can even hear the mosquitoes tapping on the window, tap tap tap. Then a loud alarm from John's cell phone ripped through the silence. John grabs his phone to shut off his alarm. John takes a second look at his phone, and he notices the time. John looks up at Paul with a dreadful look. Paul stared into John's eyes, then turns the phone around, presenting Paul the time on his phone. The time read 11:15 p.m. Paul's eyes widened when he saw the time. Paul grabs his belongings to run out of John's house, but John stops him and yells out, "What now?" Paul replied, "There is something I left out. If I make it home before midnight on my own, I see another day." John looked confused and spit out, "Explain." But the short version, Paul replied, "If the last person that heard the story can't find another to tell it to anyone, the only safe place is that person's home." John looked at Paul and yelled, "Well, what are you waiting for? Go. Get out, go home." Paul grabbed all of his belongings and ran out of John's house. I ran down the street as fast as my legs could take me. I felt the exhaustion kicking in and collapsed to my knees as my hands slapped the ground. I took out my phone and glanced at the time, 15 minutes till midnight. I don't have enough time to make it home. What do I do? I raise my head to see there's a park on my left-hand side. I tried to avoid all parks in fear, as I stood at the entrance looking at the park. It barely has any lights working. In the darkness it looks like a dark figure standing along the way. I have no choice but to cross. As I'm crossing, I hit the middle of the park, the most creepiest area where I stand. In the middle of the park the silence surrounds me, not even the breeze of the wind made a noise. As I'm standing in the middle of the park, the surrounding silence was hypnotizing. It felt time was standing still, then a roaring sound shattered the silence. My phone's alarm went off, breaking the trance that the darkness and silence had on me. I ripped my phone out of my pocket to check the time. My eyes widened, it was past midnight, the thoughts flooding through my mind. Oh shit, gotta get home, gotta get the fuck out of the darkness. As I was about to put my body into motion, I saw in the corner of my eye a shadow figure materialize. I turned my head, and the figure took the shape and transformed into an old man. The fear ran down my face with the thoughts of where did he come from, how come I didn't hear his footsteps, and why is he waving at me? Fuck no. I took off running in the opposite direction, heading towards the nearest exit. Running through the darkness, seeing barely any lights, approaching the exit that leads out into the street. Passing through the gate of the park, running out onto the street, not paying attention, smacking into a parked car. Picking myself up off the ground, thinking I got away, I think I'm going to make it. I raise my head, and down the street the old man I saw in the park waving, standing at the end of the street. My eyes filled with terror, my body told me to run. I ran back into the park, thinking if I run through the park, cutting him off and go passing him, I can make it home. Passing through the middle of the park again, heading towards another exit, hope and thinking that this has to work. Ran back onto the street using the second exit of the park, full sprint and motion. I ran out of the park onto the street, not stopping, heading down the street. Passing where the old man was equally standing in the street on the other side of the park. With the continuing motion, my body is on autopilot, running down the street thinking I'm clever, I lost him, but I was dead wrong. Every turn I made, the old man appeared even more creepier, sinister, threatening, terrifying. Every time I come face to face with the old man, he became more monsterized and his eyes turn a bright red. Then the old man, now the monster, started chasing after me. My body was in flight mode. I took off running, my energy, my strength, and my body depleted as well. It was falling apart. But the fear of death was plaguing my mind. Only one thought ran through my mind: I have to survive, I'm going to live. In the long distance I can see my house. I thought I'm going to make it, but there weren't any lights on. A thought enter: my parents weren't home. I'm running up the stairs, throwing my bag in front of me, digging for my house keys to unlock the front door. I stuck my keys to unlock the door. I violently ripped open the front door, falling inside. The monster was chasing me before the monster realized that I fell into my house. I kicked the door shut, slamming it into the monster's face. Safe inside my house, I ran to my door, hitting all the locks on the door. Walking through the house, not a soul in sight. I walked up the stairs to enter the bathroom to turn on the shower. As the water was heating up, I left to enter my bedroom. As I entered my room, I hit the switch to turn on the lights, but nothing happened. I raised my head to look at the light fixture. As I'm staring at the light fixture, I heard my door slowly creaking, moving, then heavy breathing piercing the darkness. I slowly turned to see where it's coming from, two red eyes floating in the darkness. The monster approaches, staring down at me face to face. it raises its arm, then it grabs me by my throat. I'm trying to fight it, but all my strength and stamina bled dry. It was getting harder to breathe, feeling my body shutting down. My sight was getting blurry, and right before the darkness covered my eyes, glanced over at my clock. I saw in blue numbers the time. At 1:10 a.m. I heard a roar from the monster. The morning sun breaks through the glass window of Paul's bedroom. The only sound echoing through the house was running water. The shower that ran on all through the night echoing. In Paul's room his phone went off screaming where he dropped it. The phone rang and rang every time it stopped. The calls automatically went to voicemail. On the caller ID was John trying to get in touch. John kept calling hoping that Paul would pick up. John kept calling and calling. Eventually Paul's phone went dead. John stared at his phone, a worried look ran across his face.